This is Education Insight. I'm Lacey Kendall. This week, we're talking with two women who have literally fought for their education. Avisinia Rodriguez spent much of her childhood in the Oasis Trailer Park community, where many migrant farm-working families have settled in the Coachella Valley for decades. An unlikely origin for a champion of education, but that community that knew her as simply Avi, an enthusiastic high school student, has watched and celebrated her evolution through the most difficult struggles to become Dr. Avi Rodriguez, Assistant Dean at the Palm Desert campus of Cal State San Bernardino, and now the recipient of a multi-million-dollar grant to help kids, like she was, find an easier path to success. She shares her story later in our show. We'll also meet the director of one of the Rock Stars of Tomorrow music education campuses and hear some music from his students. But first, we meet Brianna Moran. At 17, she found high school impossible due to the bullies that made her life unbearable. She left without graduating, but a decade later, woke up one morning with a weight, health, and alcohol problem and decided enough was enough. She somehow found a way out of all of these issues and went back to school to reimagine her future. Last year, she was the keynote speaker at the Redlands Adult School graduation. This past week, she was the opening speaker at the Shared Vision California Education Summit, and today joins us to share how her transformation happened. Brianna, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me, Lacey.
Do you remember the actual day that you woke up and decided you needed to make a change? Where were you at in your life at that time?
Actually, I remember the exact day. It was July 14th, 2021. I woke up and honestly, I had been going through a series of days where I was just constantly making bad life choices. And I was struggling really badly with depression at the time. So when I say I got up, I actually got up that evening. But I woke up and I was just tired of how I was feeling. And I didn't know what that meant or what those changes meant at the time. But that evening, honestly, I prayed and I was like, I'm going to do something starting tomorrow. And that's exactly what I did.
Mm-hmm. What fueled you to make the changes?
At the time, what fueled me most was I didn't want to feel how I was feeling. You know, I feel like I was stuck in a constant loop of the same day over and over again. And I wanted to feel accomplishment. And so initially, when the day after the July 14th, my first journey was actually weight loss, is that I wanted to get healthier with my body. Mm-hmm. And then a month later, that was me starting up at school. And then a month later, that was me starting my sobriety. So what kept fueling me to change my life for the better was after each initial little change, and it changed my outlook and how I felt, it was like little victories.
Yeah.
And that just kept me pushing forward.
That's a lot to handle. You know, so many people spend several years working on any one of those three issues. How did you take on all three and actually pull it off?
I think for me, initially it was, like I said, it was weight loss. And at the time I was at my highest body weight I had ever been. And, you know, as a woman, there's always this like stigma of how you should look. And I think that was always pressuring down on me. So, you know, the next day after that, I literally walked into the gym the next day. And I think after that first month, I had lost some weight. And I just in my head was like, I knew I could handle it. It was a lot faith-based for me. I was praying on a lot of things. And for me, it just felt like there was a weight lifted off of my shoulders at all times. Like I just felt like I could. And I can't explain that exact feeling, but I knew I could handle it. It just fell into my favor.
Brianna, you mentioned your faith. Is that what fueled or inspired you to keep going day after day? Tell me about that.
I would say that it is. It's one of the biggest parts of my life now. What happened actually is that on July 14th, that evening, a lot of it was me praying. I was crying and I was praying and I was saying, please give me the strength to change my life. I don't want to live like this. I don't want to feel like this. I know I'm capable of more. And each day, I just kind of kept having that conversation, my way of expressing my faith in my head. Every day, I would just be like, please continually give me the strength. Please continually give me the strength. And I think that's what kept me so focused, is that for some reason, it didn't feel so hard.
So before I get to ask you about how all of this led to, going back to school, let's go back a bit. What happened that stopped your education in the midst of high school?
What had me stop going to school was originally I had moved from Washington State to California. And unfortunately, it was my teenage years. It was hard to adjust. I was one of those ones that got bullied, unfortunately, and I didn't handle it well, which put me into independent study, along with me having medical issues at the time that prevented me from having the best attendance, which later what happened is when I turned 18, I got put into a career and I hadn't finished school. They didn't really care about that at the time. And I kind of just grew in it. And I started to truly believe that I didn't need to finish school for a while. I was fine with being stuck in this job. I don't need it. And that's what really delayed me.
Okay. Zoom forward. You're working on your weight. You're working on your mental health. And you're working on your drinking. Where did the education, going back to school, where did that all start?
This is actually a pretty special story to me on how it was presented. Originally, when I woke up and I said, I'm going to change my life, education wasn't in the front of my mind. But a month after getting into those changes, I was checking my mail and I had gotten a postcard in the mail from Redlands Adult School. Now, mind you, I had not heard of them. I had not signed up for anything, nothing like that, but it was in my mail and it just was advertising the upcoming school year. Get your GED, finish your high school diploma. And to me, that felt like a sign. So that evening, I literally went on and enrolled for the upcoming school year.
Just like that.
Just like that. It was that easy of a decision. I said, this was my sign.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this.
Wow. Okay, so what happened at Redlands Adult School that cemented that trajectory you were on, that turbocharged movement towards a higher education and a better life as a almost middle-aged woman?
So when I first walked into Redlands Adult School, it's just an orientation. It was really simple, but one of the first questions they asked me was, what are your plans for after here? And automatically I was like, oh, I don't know. I didn't even think of that. I'm just trying to get my diploma. It caught me off guard, but it made me think. I was like, do I want to take this further? And funny enough, it was just the classes started and I just found that passion that I had when I was younger for school that I lost. It just grew. It just grew so fast. And I met with one of the counselors there and she was like, what about community college? Just a little start. And Brooke absolutely changed my life. She inspired me so much. But she helped me build a plan and she got me dual enrolled as half high school student, half community college student. And I started college classes as well. So they kind of just helped me build a plan and helped me believe in myself. But I think the biggest thing for me was when I had got into school, I had said to myself, like maybe a few weeks in, I wanted to make a crazy goal. And I said, I'm going to finish all of my high school credits by my 27th birthday, which was in November. And I remember the day before my birthday, I turned in my last credit. And that was just a moment where I was like, I can do anything I set my mind to.
Yeah.
And I just knew that if it was community college, if it was more than that, whatever it was going to be, I could do it.
Brianna, when people make extraordinary changes, very often there is a mentor. You mentioned somebody by the name of Brooke. Is she the one, or were there others who inspired you or who were saying, keep going, Brianna, keep going, you can do this?
Truthfully, I didn't have like a huge circle of people, but the people that I had were tremendous with support. I had my best friend, I had my mom. Very few people knew I was going back to do this because, to be honest with you, it was something I was always ashamed of. Nobody around me ever knew I didn't finish. But everybody that did know and everybody knew that I was making that step, they all kept pushing me. I think the biggest thing about Brooke is that because she was a school counselor, she was able to help me really go to that next level. And I just appreciate that so much. She would always tell me, like, I think she made me believe in myself more. She believed in me more than I believed in myself at the time. She saw something that I didn't see. And when I finally was able to see that too, I was like, yeah, I can do anything.
So on the flip side, did you ever have any feelings of doubt about whether you could finish? And if you did, what did you do?
Of course. I definitely have feelings of doubt, feelings of intrusive thoughts telling me that, you're not going to be able to do this. You're too old to do this. It's too late to do this. Like constant thoughts that I would just try to shoo away because I was like, that's not true. That's a feeling. That's not the fact. And I just kept telling myself anytime I would get in those moments, but look how far you've come. Like I had mentioned previously, I was really big on celebrating little victories. So I made sure each week the school passed that I was celebrating that, look, you accomplished this week of schoolwork. You accomplished this week of sobriety. You accomplished this week of taking care of yourself and going to the gym. Whatever it was those small victories. And I always had to remind myself of those in any moment of doubt.
Brianna, you were the keynote speaker at the Redlands Adult School graduation. And when you were speaking to the crowd there, you said, and I quote, "In this world, society wants you to follow an expected educational timeline," end quote. And you said that is partly what discouraged you from going back and pursuing your diploma. Could you tell us about that expected educational timeline that frustrated you so much? Think about that for just a moment as we take a quick break. Our guest is Brianna Moran, the opening speaker at the Shared Vision California Education Summit recently, who returned to school after dropping out 10 years earlier, only to become an honors student, inspiring Inland Empire middle-aged men and women to try again. More in a moment. This is Education Insight. Welcome back to Education Insight. Our guest is Brianna Moran, a former high school dropout who battled bullies and then later alcohol and health issues before returning to finish her education a decade later, and who has become an honor scholar and education advocate, inspiring Inland Empire middle-aged adults returning to their education. Brianna, before the break, I asked about the comment you made. When you were the keynote speaker at your adult school graduation, you said, "In this world, society wants you to follow an expected educational timeline." And you said that that's partly what discouraged you from pursuing your diploma. Could you explain what you mean by that expected timeline that society has?
Yeah, of course. What I noticed right from the beginning, you go to high school, you graduate, you go to college, you get a career. I think in this society, we have timelines on everything. You should get married by this time. You should have babies by this time. Everything is on a timeline. And especially with school, it was one of the hardest times in my life to watch everybody that I grew up with graduate when I was supposed to graduate. And there was always this stigma like, oh, you're not going to college. And at the time, I hadn't even finished high school. And it was even harder 4 years later when everyone was graduating college. Mm-hmm. So especially at that point, I just felt like, I'm off the timeline. If I start now, everyone's already going to be 5+ years into their career. What's the point?
Yeah.
But it just felt shameful. I think what got to me though is it was in that moment I had previously spoken about when I sat there finishing my last high school credit, even though I was 20, about to be 27 years old, I was like, you know what, this is my timeline. I don't have to be on society's timeline or the expected timeline that people want me to. This is my divine time to do this. And I think more so, I really sat there and reflected is if you would have asked me to go back and do what I'm doing now when I was 17 and graduated, I don't think it would have played out the way that it is today.
Yeah.
I'm really set in what I want. I'm at college because I want to be there, not because society told me I should be there right now.
So think about when you're in your classes, in community college, and I already know your grades were spectacular and are spectacular. In the midst of that, was there a feeling of relief? And do you constantly have a feeling saying, I was afraid of this and I'm doing this well? What do you think of when you see these good grades at the end of a semester?
That's kind of my exact thought is I really was afraid of this. Like, I thought I wasn't capable of this. I'm not going to lie. Anybody who's been in school knows it can be stressful, especially if you're juggling a job or you have kids or whatever it may be. Like, it can be stressful, but I would always sit there and be at the end of it and be like, oh, I got this. And I think more so is that when I sat in these classrooms and I looked around and I was like, we are all at all different timelines. You see people straight out of high school. You see people my age. You see people 20 years older. It's all over the place. And I was just like, we all have our own timelines. And I was almost mad at myself a little bit. Like, why didn't I do this sooner?
Brianna, education and diets, quitting smoking, people who are in recovery, any of these things, when they're first beginning the process, they're told you're going to have to develop some new habits and you're going to have to break some old bad habits. What are some of the habits you had to develop to get this kind of success going in general and academically?
In general, the first thing I had to do, and I will kind of start with my sobriety, is I needed to be able to sit with my emotions. For me, part of my alcohol abuse was kind of being able to numb the hard feelings I was feeling, because when I was drinking, I was happy. And so the hardest part of becoming sober was being able to sit with every feeling that I had, whether that was sadness, I was angry, whatever it was. I had to be able to sit, work through it, and then move forward from it, because I wasn't used to doing that. So that was one of the hardest habits I think I had to learn, was to be able to be like, it's okay that you're feeling this way, but let's work through it. When it came to everything else, my biggest thing was time management. Lucky for me, though, I love everything that has to do with like planners and sticky notes and all of that. So planning out my time between everything was something that was really easy for me. And I think having that busy of a schedule, working, having to take care of myself, take care of my health, go to the gym, all of that combined kept me so busy. So it almost helped me in my journey with sobriety. It kept me going. Like, I don't have time to think about drinking.
You mentioned early on that when this process of change first began, you didn't have a lot of support. It was you and a school guidance counselor. Now that you've got some time under your belt in all of these recoveries and efforts of growth, do you have a bigger support network going on? As I'd imagine you're going to say you do.
I definitely do. I still have my most important people that have been with me since the beginning. I've been lucky to be introduced to more counselors that are at my college that are helping me with my educational journey. And that's very helpful to me. But I think one of the biggest supports I have too is people that I've known for a long time that just weren't aware of what was going on until I made them aware. I actually posted on my social media a graduation picture from my high school graduation in June. And a lot of people that had known me for a long time were really surprised because they never knew that. But the amount of support and love, and that's amazing that you went back, I'm so proud of you, that I got after that, was just so relieving. It was just almost like, why was I hiding this? Why was this such a bad secret for me?
Yeah. Brianna, where do you want all of this hard work to lead you?
I have a very nicely planned educational timeline. And I'm working really hard. Like, in my head, I keep telling myself that's exactly what's going to happen. But right now I'm at Crafton. I am in the honors program because I'm hoping, knock on wood, to get into UCLA in 2 years. I want to go all the way, honestly. That's the craziest part, is I want to get my master's. I want to get my PhD. And I know at the end of it, after a lot of hard work, at the end of it, I want to be a clinical psychologist. And if there's one thing going back to school has taught me, and it's not even the getting into college, but it was the completing my diploma, that sense of accomplishment right there has taught me, it was that I can't limit myself anymore. If I want something, no matter how big it is, I just have to work for it, and it is achievable.
I keep thinking, there are so many people out there who struggle with issues and situations similar to yours, Brianna, but most typically think it's just too difficult to begin again. What do you say to them?
There's so many different things I could say, because I know exactly how that feels. And I think one of the biggest things is that dream whatever it may be. It could be education, it could be a diet, it could be sobriety. But that dream where you're succeeding on the other side is behind one small step. You don't have to look at something and say, I want to see my education 5 years from now. What about your education in one semester? It's about taking those small steps. And like I said, celebrating those small victories. You keep having those small victories, they lead to your bigger goals. I think the hardest part is that our biggest enemy a lot is doubt. It's too hard. And I think that you just have to really put that to the side and just make a step, just one step. And you'll see that you can really accomplish anything when you keep making those little steps forward.
Brianna, today's show, we're talking about fighting for your education. Why do you believe it was essential to go back and fight for your education?
For me, I believe it was essential to fight for my education for myself. This is something I'm really passionate about, what I've decided to go into. I'm very passionate about mental health studies. I want to help people. And I think that when you go back to school and you're fighting for something that you're passionate about and you're doing it for you, that is where you're going to find the most success.
Brianna Moran is our guest. As an almost middle-aged woman, she woke up one day and decided to end her alcohol abuse and go finish her education and many other struggles as well on top of that. But today, as an honors scholar, she's got her eyes set on UCLA, a career as a clinical psychologist, and at the Shared Vision California Education Summit, she's going to be the opening speaker. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us today on Education Insight and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Lacey.
You're listening to Education Insight. Today, focusing on Inland Empire women who fought for their education. Avisinia Rodriguez spent her early years in a migrant farm worker community in the Coachella Valley, where her dad was an irrigation specialist. She loved school and learned early that education was her path out of that community. After graduating high school, she says she wanted a college education, but never dreamed that that journey would include driving hours to classes and then hours back to work, attending classes while pregnant, finding funds to support her schooling, rejection from various campuses, then soccer practices and Girl Scout meetings with her little girl, and maintaining her grades. Today, she is Dr. Avi Rodriguez, the newly appointed interim associate dean of the Palm Desert campus of Cal State San Bernardino, and the recipient of a multi-million-dollar grant from the U.S. Department of Education to create the College Assistance Migrant Program, or CAMP, which focuses on helping students who are migrant or seasonal farm workers or the children of to stay in school. Today, she joins us to share that journey. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for taking our call.
Hi, Lacey. You can call me Avi. No need for the formalities.
Okay. Could you start by describing for us your childhood and where you grew up?
Yeah, so I grew up, first I was born in Mexico. And so when I was about 4 years old, we moved to the Coachella Valley. And I say we as my mom, my dad, and my sister. So the four of us moved to a small town in the eastern Coachella Valley called Oasis. We lived in a trailer park. And those are like the best years of my life, Lacey. Like I was reflecting about this topic and thinking of how much fun I had knowing my neighbors and being in that same community and having folks that were like-minded, recent immigrants into this country, English with their second language as was mine. So for me, my childhood was just built on community and family and just being together.
Yeah. Did your parents encourage you to do well in school?
Oh my gosh. My dad would always say that was my job. My sister's and I's job was to be good at school. So he said, like, as long as you're doing well, like, I'm going to support you. And my parents are 30 years apart. So there's already 2 generations that we were living with at home. So my dad was very much a parental figure to my mom, even. Like, it sounds weird to say, but my dad was encouraging all 3 of his girls, my mom, my sister, and I. So my mom started going to GED classes and then to English classes. And so education was always part of everything we did. Yeah. So it was always encouraged.
Did you enjoy school?
I did. A little bit of me was me just wanting the validation of my parents being proud of me. but it was also me realizing that I enjoyed learning and I enjoyed being praised by, my teachers would say, oh, you're so good at this, or I remember getting 100% on my test and being so proud of doing that work. So I've always enjoyed learning.
Yeah. You knew you wanted to go to college from early on, didn't you? I've heard you say that.
Yeah. And I think it all started with, as I mentioned, like my teachers, and then being put on early into like the GATE program. And I really am thankful that even though I was an English learner, my mom was encouraged and my parents were both encouraged to put my sister and I in English only classes, which meant that we would have to test every year to make sure that we were learning English because, we were Spanish speakers at home. So being part of GATE as a kid, as an immigrant student, was super, it brought a lot of pride to my family and to me. So I knew that was how to get to college, was to be part of GATE. And I was always going to any conference. So as a kid, I was also part of the migrant education program, which because I lived in Oasis and my dad did some work in the fields, we were part of migrant ed, and they had so many conferences, Lacey, that both for parents and for students.
Uh-huh.
So my first experience with like a summer program was through migrant education, where we did an overnight program and we did some learning and some bonding. But my parents were always at every meeting. We went to every college fair that we had. And so it was always something that we just knew we had to do as adults.
Wow. That sounds great. For those that have never heard of it, could you explain what the GATE program is?
So GATE is for the Gifted and Talented Education. So It's a program that I don't know if it exists anymore. It used to be back in the 90s.
It was big.
It was it was huge. And I feel like now that I meet people as adults, a lot of them are like, oh yeah, I was in GATE too. But it was just like a blanket category that we gave students. But it was basically where we would do after school tutoring, or we would do extra work after school. We had a class. They would meet with teachers that would give us extra assignments, but it just felt like, oh, we're cool because we're in GATE.
Yeah. Okay, so GATE got you even more excited about your education, kept you on track. Where did your college education begin, Avi?
So I started college when I went to Cal State San Marcos right after high school. So I will tell you this, Lacey, me being the overachiever, me being I'm going to go to college and, do all these great things. I always looked down on going to a CSU because I was on track to go to a UC, research-based school, and I had great grades, but my SAT scores weren't that fantastic. So when I got into San Marcos, I was like, oh, I'm only good enough for a Cal State. That was my mindset as a high school kid. I had no idea, the benefits of going to a CSU.
Yeah.
So it did start at San Marcos, but it had a little bit of extra work because even though San Marcos was a fairly new CSU at the time, they had strict admissions requirements for people that were out of the area. And because I lived in the Coachella Valley, I was out of the service area, so they had higher expectations for SATs and GPAs. So whenever I was able to get admitted, it was through a special admission through the College Assistance Migrant Program or the CAMP program. They were able to accept me. So I started a summer program with CAMP in early July, and it was a 6-week-long program where we were enrolled in a math class to be caught up at the time. Now that I work here, I realized that it was a remedial class because I was behind in math. So they put me in a class, in a 6-week-long math class to try to get me caught up to freshman math. And I also took part in cultural programming. So it was a whole summer school, but at the university. So that was my introduction to college, was going to Cal State San Marcos and be part of the summer bridge program with the CAMP, with the College Assistance Migrant Program at San Marcos.
Yeah. Okay, so you've mentioned you got a lot of help from the GATE program and then from the CAMP program, but a lot of college support programs have helped you along the way, and you love to give homage to those. Tell me about them and how they helped you.
So one of the programs that I always like to talk about is Upward Bound. When I was in high school, Upward Bound was housed out of College at the Desert here in Palm Desert. And I was actually able to attend a Saturday class, going back to me loving school, Lacey. We had Saturday class with Upward Bound where we did enrichment courses, whether it be around English or around math. We did a couple of campus tours. I know one summer we went to UCLA and we went to Seattle to see the university. So I was able to take part of that program when I was in high school. Yeah. And then also even going back to, I think it was about 8th or 9th grade, I took part of the Inland Empire Future Leaders Program, which is a program out of CSUSB, where students that are in 8th and 9th grade go up to a camp and do a leadership camp up in Idlewild, up in the mountains. So again, pushing that education. And then finally, like I mentioned earlier, camp was super helpful when I was doing my undergraduate program at San Marcos.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Education Insight. Avi, at this point, it sounds like you were on the road to doing extraordinary well. But when you got to your master's program, and that's where life became really difficult, didn't it?
Yeah, Lacey, that was a very trying time in my educational career.
Yeah.
And it was both good and bad. I finished at San Marcos and I had a degree in sociology. And I remember being, almost done my senior year and thinking, what am I going to do after this? Like, what do I do for work? You go to college to get a job, right? So I remember thinking like a degree in sociology, like, what am I going to do with this? So in 2008, I applied and got into a master's program at San Diego State, which was super exciting, but the same week that I found out that I got into the master's program, I also found out that I was pregnant. And at the time I was married. And so it was bittersweet because I thought, okay, I am going to be a grad student and I'm also carrying this child. Like, how am I going to do both? And I kept thinking of all of my aunts and cousins who were working, part-time somewhere here locally and we're going to be parents. And they were just so happy. And I'm like, if my cousins that are, trying to figure out life are giving birth, then I can figure out life and give birth to at the same time. So, So for me, they were my motivation. But it was funny. I tell this story of whenever I told my parents that I got into the master's program and that I told them that I was pregnant, they were more excited that I was pregnant. And I'm like, do you realize how important it is? So for them, even though they valued education, they also are parents. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to be grandparents. So for me, it was that in 08. And then in 09, in January, my dad passed away. He had cancer and he died. And it was my winter break. It was my first year of grad school. And when he died, I was like, well, I have to come home. Like, my dad died. I was living in San Diego at the time. I thought I have to come home. I was pregnant. My daughter was going to be born 2 months after. 3 or 4 months after my dad died. And so I thought I just need to come home to be with my mom. She wouldn't be alone. So that time frame was, okay, he's gone. So I'm grieving because my dad died. I'm also happy because I'm going to be a mom for the first time. So it was that struggle. And somewhere in between that struggle, Lacey, everything happens for a reason. I was able to apply for a job at College of the Desert out here in Palm Desert. Uh-huh. So even though I was living in San Diego, I applied for this job. And I remember I was about 7 or 8 months pregnant when I applied for the job. And I wore an oversized coat. And I was like, I hope they can't see that I'm hiding this baby belly. Uh-huh. And so I got that job in 09. And they gave it to me maybe like in late March. And I said, it's thanks for the offer. I accept, but I will need to take time off because I'm having a baby. So it was a little bit of that transition of my dad just died. I'm giving birth to a baby. I got a new job. So that means I have to move from San Diego to move back to the Coachella Valley. And so that meant that moving back to the Coachella Valley meant that I had to commute to finish my master's program at San Diego. So, and at the same time, I had a marriage that was falling apart. I was a new mom. I was still grieving of my dad passing. I was excited to be in the master's program. I just kept thinking, like, what's one more thing to my plate? So I shared that I would live in Indio out here in the Coachella Valley. I would go work part-time. I would work at COD as an outreach specialist. Mm-hmm. And then I would come intern over here at CSUSB's Palm Desert campus. I was interning at this campus. And then I would drive to San Diego for class twice a week. I would spend the night at my friend's house and I would come home. So the first year of my daughter's life, I missed many milestones. I don't remember her feeding times. It was an interesting time, and having those difficulties through my master's program, it will make it unforgettable. But we got through and we finished in May of 2010. I got my degree and that was that.
Good for you. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. So who or what inspired you to actually go further and get your PhD? And what did you want that degree to actually do for you?
I'm going to have to go back to my college graduation when I graduated with my degree in sociology. And that was probably one of the last memories I have of my dad. And he was so proud of me. And he said, I don't know what you're going to do with your life, but all I know is that I want you to help people. And I kept thinking that's been in the back of my head for so long of him just saying, I don't know what you're going to do, but help people. And so whenever I started working in higher education, I started to notice that people that had those extra letters after their name, the EDD or the PhD, had a place on the table, and they were making decisions for students, for my community. And so I thought, I already have the knowledge. I already have the experience. Let me just go get this piece of paper that tells people that I am a doctor. And a lot of it was pushing from my former dean, who became my dissertation chair, Dr. Sharon Brown-Welty, who just kept saying, okay, come on, if you gotta just keep writing. And just having different people that I don't think I've ever verbally acknowledged or thought about, but people that throughout my life have always told me, keep going. We need more Latinas in higher ed that understand our students. So we need to keep going. So I think all of that together is what inspired me, because I wanted this degree to give back to my community, because I knew that we needed to have passionate individuals who had a seat at the table advocating for the needs of our students here.
If you just joined us, you're listening to Education Insight. We're speaking with Dr. Avi Rodriguez from the Palm Desert campus of CSUSB. Avi, recently I read The Desert Sun in the Coachella Valley, in an article there that said you recently received a $2.3 million grant. I want to hear about that, but we need to take a quick break first. We're talking with Inland Empire women who have fought for their education and found success. More with our guest, Dr. Avisinia Rodriguez, and more Education Insight in just a moment. Welcome back to Education Insight and our discussion with women who have fought incredible odds to achieve their education. Dr. Avisinia Rodriguez started her education from a Coachella Valley migrant farm community, but today is the interim associate dean for the Coachella Valley's only 4-year university, the Palm Desert campus of CSUSB. She insists that professor support, workshops, campus counseling centers, and working on campus helped her pave the path to earning her PhD and becoming a top administrator at CSUSB. Avi, before the break, I asked about the $2.3 million grant you just received. Tell us about that.
The College Assistance Migrant Program grant is a grant from the federal government that is used to support migrant education students and the dependents of migrant farm workers in the Coachella Valley. So it's supposed to service students from Palo Verde, which is in Blythe, that school district, all to the Coachella Valley, all the way until Desert Hot Springs. So that whole area. So if I don't know square miles, Lacey, but it's a huge area from Blythe all the way to the Hot Springs. And there's a need for all those students whose parents are migrant workers, or many times some of the students themselves are migrant workers. So that's a program will help them get their classes, make sure that they fill out their financial aid applications, all those different support services that they have for our students.
Okay, so under your counsel, Avi, what do you want the camp program to include for students?
So ideally, I've seen that our students need some kind of support or a community of scholars within the university. So I think what helped me be successful in college was to have like-minded people that we can share experiences and share textbooks and share tips on getting through higher education. So ideally, for me, what I would want this program to do is support our students. And sometimes support will look like financial stipends for books, and it might look like a summer program or a winter intersession that we can do extra activities with our students so that they can be successful and get all of the resources they need to graduate from college.
Yeah. So we've mentioned at the top of our interview, and you brought it up since, growing up in that Oasis neighborhood. Have you had the chance to go back and visit your old neighborhood since growing up there and now being in this incredible leadership position in education in the Coachella Valley?
You know, the trailer park is still there. The trailer that I grew up in is no longer there, but everyone that I grew up with moved out or has gone elsewhere. But I will share an interesting story of the way the universe works. My sister recently bought a house in Coachella. In about 2018, she bought a house, and her neighbor is our neighbor from the trailer park where we grew up in. So our neighbor to our left in the trailer, her parents, we were the neighbors, and then now that my sister recently bought her house, she's her neighbor again. So it's interesting to know that the people in the valley stay here and they continue to work in the community and they continue to be around. So it's nice to know that, my sister's neighbor, who was my neighbor growing up too, she still has some connection. So without actually trying, we are still connected. And I did take my daughter recently to the trailer park and I showed her where I grew up. And I didn't realize, Lacey, how when I was a kid, that place seemed huge. And now that I went back as an adult, it's a small trailer park that, for me growing up and rollerblading and riding my bike seemed like a huge adventure. But now I'm like, oh, this is not that big.
Yeah. So today on our program, Avi, we're talking with women who have fought for their education, literally, and you clearly have as well. Why do you feel it's important to fight for an education?
This is a great question, Lacey. I think that we need to have advocates for yourself. You need to fight for what you think is best for you, because obviously we are living in a world where we have to fight for ourselves, but also think about the community who helped raise you. For me, it's always been about giving back. Even though I wasn't born in the Coachella Valley, I feel indebted to every single person that ever helped me get through any process of whether it be education or just surviving. I think that it's important to fight because we don't know who's coming down. We want to support our future community. We want to continue to build the community and just continue to advocate for what we need and what will make us successful. And obviously bring up that upward mobility. Many of our people here are first generation immigrant students. And so let's build up that mobility. Let's build up our community and let that be a goal of ours.
Dr. Avi Rodriguez, the Assistant Dean of the Palm Desert campus of Cal State San Bernardino. She's the recent recipient of a $2.3 million grant to create the College Assistance Migrant Program to help the thousands of migrant youth fight their own fight to finish college in the Coachella Valley. Avi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lacey, for having me.
As we close out this edition of Education Insight, we meet Alan Benson, the director of the Rancho Cucamonga campus of the Rockstars of Tomorrow Music Education Program, where young students learn music skills, theory, and especially performance. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Lacey.
First of all, tell me about the Rockstars of Tomorrow music program.
Well, we do sort of a non-traditional music lesson type program. We ask our students to come in and tell us about some of the songs they like, what kind of songs do they want to learn how to play, and we use the songs and the music that they like as the vehicle to teach them about music theory, to teach them about skill and technique and how to play their instrument.
What do the kids like learning most in the program?
Well, kids like learning the songs that they choose, but they also like getting set up for some of the performance programs that we have. We do have performance classes. And so that gives them an opportunity to get up on stage with another group of students that are similar in age, similar in talent, and play as a cohesive unit.
Yeah. Alan, I learned while trying to find you, because I'd heard so much about Rockstars of Tomorrow, there are actually chapters all over Southern California. Tell me about that.
Correct. So the first Rockstars of Tomorrow studio was in Norco. It actually started out of the owners, the CEO of the corporation, out of his house. He eventually grew to the point where he needed to open up a studio. He opened up in Norco. We were the second studio, and Rancho Cucamonga opened up in 2016. Then Chino Hills was opened up shortly after that. Laverne, Riverside. Now we have one in Huntington Beach. We also have a chapter in Frisco, Texas.
Wow. You're sharing music from one of your groups with our program here today, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Tell me about them.
Sure. That's the group is called Minor Strut, and it was students from Rockstars of Tomorrow in the Norco studio that actually started one of the very first student bands. They have since grown through the program, and they are now in their late teens, early 20s. They've learned how to write music, they've learned how to perform music, and they have recorded their own music. And so they've actually transcended the program itself, and many of them have come back to Rockstars as instructors to help the next generation of students.
Okay. Well, we'll be hearing some music from Minor Strut here in just a moment. But first of all, how can listeners who are hearing our interview here today, how can they learn more about your program?
We have a website. It is www.rockstarsoftomorrow.com, and they can find out all about Rockstars of Tomorrow, the franchises that will be opening up soon, the current programs, and the current locations that we have.
Alan, your program sounds exciting and super fun. I wish you absolutely the best of luck in teaching the Rockstars of Tomorrow here in the Inland Empire. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And that wraps up another edition of Education Insight. We leave you with music from the band Minor Strut, one of the student performance bands from the Rockstars of Tomorrow music education program in Rancho Cucamonga. I'm Lacey Kendall. Thanks for joining us.
Education Insight is produced in partnership with KVCR.
Our executive producer is Jacob Poor, and our production engineer is Tyler Veazey.
Support is provided by Growing Inland Achievement.
Join us again next time for
Education Insight.
It's hard to keep me up and run, stumbling